lunch going to be served, but also we continue working. What I can promise to you in my capacity as a moderator, that probably one of the most interesting, if not the most interesting panel is just ahead of us. It is linked to the future. And it is linked to probably the most important organization and the principles we all believe in, multilateralism. So we're starting to debate about the future of the United Nations. And we're going to have probably the most special speakers because they are insiders. They're coming from within the system. They have been running the global parliament. They were leading in different times. So I think we're going to have a lot of ideas here. In my capacity as a moderator, I will be asking also questions that I believe are important for all of us and for the future. We'll be starting with Maria Fernanda Espinosa. Maria, you know Maria very well, no need to say a lot about her, but she was also the president of the 73rd session of the United Nations General Assembly and served in many other positions, including she's a member of the board of NGIC. Maria, the floor is yours, but one of the questions I want to ask you specifically, and also the others, is a very simple one. So you do your opening remarks, but also please answer the question and be not diplomatic, be precise and correct. Yesterday, speaking about myself, participating so many years participating at the United Nations General Assembly, in a way, I saw the bottom of everything when I saw the President of the United States really diminishing, not respecting the United Nations and the United Nations General Assembly. And on top of that, I was shocked to see silence in the room and no keeping to any possible rules and regulations. And last but not least, if you're a statesman, you need to behave as a statesman, especially on the highest possible tribune in the world. Say something that you might be proud and your children might be proud of. Do something for the planet. So my simple question to you with your opening remarks is, looking where we are now at the bottom of the bottom, what could you do in the future? What would you do correctly and precisely to strengthen that most important institution on the planet, the United Nations? The floor is yours, Maria.
Thank you, Rosen, for your question, but thank you to NGIC for celebrating the 80th anniversary of the UN, bringing former presidents of the General Assembly together. I think this is a really, really powerful group, and I feel so proud to be a member of the Council of Presidents of the General Assembly. And sometimes people don't understand what the job and the role is. But let me tell you that the President of the General Assembly is the position that is universally voted. It's perhaps the most difficult and democratic job to have at the UN. No? It is the 193 member states vote for the president, and the president is the person that represents the organization. We often think that it is the Secretary General, but no, it's the president of this Parliament of Nations who is the General Assembly. And everybody talks about the crisis of the UN, but also I think that there is an acknowledgement, an agreement that we cannot even imagine a world without the United Nations. For all the good it has done, this organization came about with this phrase that it was an organization that was created to protect humanity from the scourge of war, basically to prevent a third world war. And it has done that, to work for the dignity and the rights of we the peoples of this planet, and also to care about this phrase, which is the freedom from want, meaning development. And I think that in many ways, the UN has delivered. It has delivered, for example, in the decolonization process, who has been one of the greatest achievements of the UN. When the charter was signed, it was signed by 51 countries. And we have 193, and hopefully soon 194 members of the organization. But of course, time passes. The UN is a human-made organization. It's a very complex political system and requires a major overhaul, requires a profound reform process. We have heard about the reform of the UN since 30 years ago or more. But I think that today we are in a moment of make it or break it. We are at a crossroads. And we are experiencing also a moment of reinvention. And I think that with challenge and crisis comes opportunity. So we have in front of us the Pact of the Future and its implementation process. We have the UN80 initiative and the implementation process of the UN80. All these are pathways for reform. But basically, perhaps this is not even enough. The organization needs a profound management reform, a new financing compact for the organization. It's not a secret that the UN is undergoing a deep liquidity crisis right now with an overall budget cut of 20%, but also many countries that haven't paid their dues with $2.7 billion in arrears of many of the countries that have not paid. And a shortage, a big decrease in the budget for the peacekeeping operations of the UN, which is one of the flagship activities of the organization. But this is not a liquidity crisis. This is the symptom of a deeper political legitimacy, effectiveness, authority crisis, and leadership crisis of the organization. So we have now the opportunity to rebuild the organization so it responds to the challenges that we face today. A new landscape and a new configuration of conflicts. There is no anymore the traditional state-to-state armed conflict. There are many other challenges, including cybersecurity, including health risks, that makes us not only vulnerable, but increasingly interdependent. So I would say, because I really would like to hear from my colleagues and former presidents, I would say we need to reinvent, to come up with a new financing compact for the organization, accompanied by a major transparency mechanism. I think the UN needs and requires an independent audit mechanism. I think that effectiveness and transparency in the way the UN uses the resources is absolutely vital. And we need to make sure that the money of the UN, which basically comes from the taxpayers, is used to address the real challenges and the real priorities of the organization. The second pillar is a completely reform and restructuring of the peace and security architecture. There is a new agenda for peace that was adopted by member states, but I think even the new agenda for peace needs a major overhaul. And the major overhaul goes through putting more emphasis and at the center the prevention agenda. One of the issues where I see that the UN continues to have a big debt with humanity is doubling down on prevention. As Benjamin Franklin mentioned, 1 ounce in prevention is worth 1 ton in a response. So it's cost effective, but the UN is not doing, deploying its preventive diplomacy capacities. So I think that's something that needs to be strengthened. And number 3, the UN throughout these 80 years has produced more than 40,000 mandates, things that the UN should do. So it is time now, in times of austerity and shortage, that we prioritize the aspects or the issues where the UN should be at the forefront. In my opinion, one of the issues should be really be where it needs to be when conflicts arise. If, for some reason, conflicts cannot be prevented, it should be the actor, the go-to platform to solve conflicts and to make peace and to sustain peace. This is something that we really need to do more work about. And perhaps to end, it's one of the issues is that the main organs of the organization requires power rebalancing. The power of the General Assembly. The General Assembly is the factory of international law, is the regulatory body of humanity. And presidents, basically when we realize the power we have for this, to fully use this factory of rule-making and international law, we have to go. So one of the issues I think that we have to rethink, my ask would be, from first-hand experience, is that we need a 2-year duration for presidents of the General Assembly and 1 single term for a Secretary General. That would allow a rebalancing between the political power of the Parliament of Nations, the General Assembly, and the executive responsibilities of the Secretary General. A Secretary General, as it says in the Charter, is the chief operating officer. That's the role of a Secretary General, and it should remain a chief operating officer. The control of the organization has to be given back to the member states, and I think it is time to do that. It is now or never, and I've been closely engaged in the reform conversation, and I hope that we will be able to be in a position of power when we make all this come true. So thank you, Rosen, and over to you.
Thank you, Maria. You spoke about the Secretary General, and let me ask you the following question. If you were to be the Secretary General right now, what would you do to stop the Ukrainian war and the Gaza war? What would you do? That's for you, please. Please answer. Be not diplomatic.
Well, first of all, I think that these wars were preventable. Perhaps one of the major shortcomings of the organizations have been not to prevent the wars before they happen. Now that they have happened, we have seen many initiatives about peace negotiations, asking for ceasefires, short-term, medium-term ceasefires, many of the initiatives that are out there, the mediation role of countries like Qatar, of countries like Turkey, regional organizations coming forward. I would say that's where the UN has to operate as a bridge builder, as a convener, basically boosting the already existing initiatives. I think regions have a great role to play. The big powers have a great role to play, but the UN should keep and remain the bridge builder, the convener, the place, the to-go place when situations become difficult. How to solve the wars? I think that what I can tell you is that there are no military solutions, not to the ongoing wars, but to any war. It is about good diplomacy. It is about good prevention. It is about proper peace building. And I think that the UN should reclaim and go back to the basics, go back to its charter. And quite honestly, you know, I see that, well, I would leave it there. And it's not that I was going to say something that is not politically correct, because here we are, Chatham House. But what I'm going to say is that we focus on Ukraine, which is a profound and deep and a terrible situation that has lasted too long, in my opinion. We look at the Middle East, but as we speak, there are more than 100 active armed conflicts, and that we don't talk about so much. The Democratic Republic of Congo, Myanmar, Sudan, you know, there are many things that are happening around the world. In my own region, in Latin America and the Caribbean, no, it is painful because it's not a state-to-state war what is happening. It is a war that is touching and hurting the entire region, called organized crime and drug trafficking. This is the new phase of conflict of today, and we need to develop the tools to address these issues. First of all, through the regional organizations, and most importantly, to the UN playing a critical role. We heard one of the heads of state saying, when I was trying to make peace among parties in certain conflicts, I would have liked to receive a phone call from the UN, which I did not. So we see that there is a long way to go still, but there is always time to fix things. Today, it is the time to fix the UN.
Thank you, Maria. Next on my list is Serjan Kerim. He was serving as the president of the 62nd session of the United Nations General Assembly. He was also serving as a minister of foreign affairs of the Republic of North Macedonia 2000-2001. Serjan, again, the same question to you. How would you strengthen the United Nations looking at the future? How are you going to make it more stronger? Thank you.
Thank you, President Plevneliev. Let me begin with a remark. Looking around this table, I see only one gray hair besides my own across the table. Amr Musa and I have the longest record with the United Nations of all of you here, over 40 years. So that's long enough to learn something about the United Nations, and let me share with you some of the lessons I have learned, including being a president of the General Assembly and running for the position of Secretary General. And I will tell you why I decided to run 2015 for this position. The first deception about the United Nations when people are talking, including our own presidents, is that when they are criticizing the United Nations, they mean the Secretariat. They don't mean the United Nations. And they do it with a good reason, because the Secretariat and some of the Secretaries General have hijacked the organization and made an inversion. The presidents of the General Assembly can sing this song in the best way of all of the diplomats who have been in the United Nations working for its cause. Because our experience as presidents says that many decisions or not decisions are made due to mismanagement of the organization. Even now, at this very moment, when reform is overdue and there is a consensus among all the member states about it, I haven't heard a member state who is against it. Things are put in the wrong way. the cart is put in front of the horse because we are offered a cost-cutting exercise, and I'm a professor of economics. I beg your pardon, I must say that. That's my expertise, and I know what I'm talking about. You never, ever do a cost-cutting, and Professor Lukšić can confirm that as well, because we're teaching the same subject. You never, ever start a cost-cutting without having a management reform concept. I haven't seen that management reform concept yet, but I have seen concrete proposals how to do the cost-cutting. So the criticism, including the one of the President of the United States, in terms of mismanagement, are fully justified. Let's be clear about that. That has nothing to do with the organization, with the member states. It has to do with the Secretariat. And if there is no profound reform of the management of the United Nations organization, I think then this very bold title of our panel, The Future of UN, can become questionable. Why? Because people are already asking, at least that's my recent experience, what is going on? Is it the beginning of the end of the organization, or is it a new beginning? Of course, I'm on the side of those who claim that it's a new beginning, and I want that to be a new beginning, but not unconditionally. The first imperative is, as I said, this profound, overdue management reform. The second one is the Security Council reform. The Security Council reform is not overdue. We have a concrete example in multilateralism which shows that 20 countries within the framework of the G20 can talk to each other, do talk to each other, and make some decisions. Why? Because there is no veto right there. If there would be a veto right there, it would be paralyzed like the Security Council. So you don't need too much of wisdom to be aware why the Security Council is paralyzed. It's just because of this veto right. The third point, if we really want the United Nations to be successful, then we have to spread the truth about the complexity of the decision-making process of an organization which has 193 members. And sometimes people say it is ineffective, it is too slow. No, it's not true. It is the complexity of the decision-making process. The first stage we have is when we identify an issue, we differ. It takes time to identify it and to agree on that. Then the second stage is the awareness. For that we need also some time. The third one is we start talks, as we did about the Security Council reform. The fourth one is to negotiate, which is going on within the UN, and the fifth one is the implementation. It took exactly 8 years since we did put on the agenda of the United Nations climate change. It was 2007, and 2015 we agreed in Paris within the COP on the profound changes and on a common policy on climate change. That example shows this complexity. So I would recommend when we have this kind of discussions to be aware of these moments. And last but not least, Maria had mentioned with a very good reason the Council of Presidents. I believe that for the institutional record of the organization, which is always and part and parcel of a serious organization, to have such a council is more than necessary, and especially to give it a status of observer. And the inefficiency and the obstacles we are facing in this regard are also a symptom that this management reform is overdue, so that this doesn't become also a problem which will last forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. With your wisdom, so many years in the United Nations, my question also goes to you. What would you do if you were to be the Secretary General now to stop the wars in Ukraine and Gaza?
Now it's a bit late. I would have, from the first day, engaged one of the distinguished world statesmen to be the envoy of the Secretary General and to deal with the issue. And there are some around, and not one of my assistants. Or if I do delegate, I delegate it to really a great personality recognized in the whole world. The alternative to that is I engage myself and go there and don't go out from Moscow and Kiev until they reach an agreement. There is no other remedy, including with due respect and great respect to this great state here, which is our host. I don't think even they can do it. Only the Ukrainians and the Russians can and should do it, and this is the task of a Secretary General. Dag Hammarskjöld died going to Congo to resolve the situation on the ground. He could have sit in the very beautiful office on the 38th floor and wait to developments there to resolve situations. Developments on the ground do never resolve situations. So is the situation in Ukraine. And the same, in the same context, allow me, President Plevnev, to mention Gaza. The same goes for Gaza. We have been waiting, I don't know what for, probably for things to resolve by themselves. A conference on the Middle East should have been done. The British have suggested it now. That should have been done many years ago, which would take the example of Egypt and Israel. Egypt and Israel agreed on a principle, peace for land, and that was why they resolved their problems. Amr Moussa is here and can talk about that with more competence than me, but I allow myself in his presence to say that. Without that principle, there would be never, ever a peace between Israel and Egypt. The same goes for Palestine and Israel. Security for statehood. That should have been a conference many years ago, because such conferences last 2, 3, 5, 6 years, but that's better to have such a conference than this catastrophe which we are facing in Gaza, killing children, women, breaching human rights laws and everything.
Thank you, Excellency. One more question for you comes from Roshan.
Yeah, I would like just to comment on the issues that the former president of the General Assembly, Sergeant, said. Number one, let's be realistic. It is incapability of Secretary General of the United Nations and also lack of leadership of the Secretary General of Arab League. do you know that because we've been in a field of Ukraine, the war from day one, when there was no organization, been having a trips to there, Secretary General been waiting for months and months just simply to respond. You don't resolve the problems with one simple tweet in your penthouse in New York. And Secretary General of Arab League, his tweets in his villa in the heart of the Cairo. I mean, that's the issue. I know personally because the first ever head of the UN-affiliated institution, it was Tedros, Dr. Tedros, head of the WHO, who visited Ukraine and who visited Syria and all of this place. Who is stopping Secretary General to enter the Gaza? Any power you think that any country will take a responsibility to stop or to hurt Secretary General just to make a global scandal? And we are talking about international personalities. Come on, let's be realistic. One of the leaders, Tony Blair, is providing a paper that how we can remove Palestinians from territory and build a new villas and resort complexes. That's a leadership? I mean, we have to be understanding. Firstly, it was thanks from last year that the General Assembly with the presidency, unfortunately, Denis Francis, due to his health issues, is not here. Then Security Council couldn't make it, then they moved it to the General Assembly. But still, I mean, General Assembly has a power, no? One Security Council member is just saying no, and then good luck. We heard all of these things. And there is no solidarity. President Council is good, but any actions, any real steps, sorry, but statements and simple discussions are not going to help to anyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Roshan. Great comment. My next speaker, Vuk Jeremic. We all know him. He was the president of the 67th session of the United Nations General Assembly, also serving as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Serbia. Vuk, the same question, and of course your remarks. How can you make UN stronger? Thank you.
What is the question? Can you remind me again?
How can you strengthen UN?
How can you strengthen the UN at this stage? Well, I believe there's very little that can be done at this very moment. We had a very good conversation last night about multilateralism and the geopolitics, and I'm sorry that not too many people were around at that time. I'm going to repeat some of the things that I said last night, and I apologize to those few people who were there at that time if they heard some of my thoughts again. But I think that the time for a significant and structural reform of the UN has passed. In 2016, I was actually running for the post of Secretary General of the UN. And I'm not the only person at this table who was running at that time. Miroslav was running, and Igor was also a candidate. And we talked about the future of the UN and how to reform the UN during that race. I actually presented a platform, and I published 52 things, concrete things that I thought at that time needed to be done in order to strengthen the United Nations. I was very transparent in this regard. Perhaps that was the reason why I lost. But that was the moment which I think was a peak time for multilateralism in our lifetime. Those were the good days. It just followed the adoption of the Paris Climate Treaty. The SDGs were adopted in 2015. It was a good time in the international arena. That was the time to try and reform the United Nations so that it make it better fit for purpose in the 21st century. You do a major fix of your roof when the weather is nice. When it's pouring rain, it's difficult to do a very serious and structured overhaul. And now, proverbially speaking, it is raining. We are in the midst of a geopolitical recession where the big powers, not only that they do not see eye to eye, they are very, very actively opposed to each other and involved in proxy conflicts around the world. There is no political will right now necessary by construction of the UN system to carry out any meaningful reform. So what do you do under these circumstances? What do you do when the organization that you have and that you cherish, and I agree with everybody else who spoke before me that it is the most important organization of international cooperation, what do you do when one such organization is no longer fit for purpose, no longer delivers on the global public goods that it is expected to deliver? Because the balance of power in the world changed, or there are new challenges emanating out of the technology progress and whatnot. Well, there are essentially three things you do. One is to reform so that this organization starts being more fit for purpose. Number two is to just do things in alternative organizations, cooperate in alternative fora that are perhaps of regional nature, where you can actually get things done. If you're a European country, do more things through the EU. If you're an African country, do more things through the African Union, or ASEAN for those who are in ASEAN. I mean, be pragmatic and do things where things can be done. And then the third thing that you can do when multilateralism and international organizations do not work is to take things into your own hand. Do things unilaterally. Do what you believe you must. And there are examples of such, action in the world these days. Russia's doing something that can be described as unilateral. Israel is also doing things that they believe they must. And they don't care about the opprobrium. They are just doing what they believe is the only way forward for them. And I fear that in the time to come, in the next years, we are going to see all three things playing out concurrently. There will be attempts at reform of international organizations. There will be doubling down on international fora alternative to the UN, perhaps regional ones. And unfortunately, there will be more unilateral action. There'll be more and more actors taking things into their own hands. And then the question is, the number one, the reform, the thing that everyone at this table champions and supports, otherwise we would not have been members of the Nizami Ganjavi family that believes in international cooperation and multilateralism. What is it in the first cluster, in the reform thing, that you can do? Unfortunately, it's got to be very modest, because everything else that we would try and, speechify here or to make grandstanding here is simply not realistic. If you ask me, is it possible to reform the Security Council of the United Nations? I'll tell you straight, it is not possible to reform the Security Council of the United Nations. Is it the central organ of the UN, and out of that organ, out of the atmosphere that exists in that organ, emanates everything else in the organization? Yes, that's true. But there is no way that the Security Council is going to be reformed for as long as there is a geopolitical recession. And geopolitical recession, I am afraid, is going to stay with us for many more years. What Maria Fernanda said about the preventive diplomacy, I sign up to that 100%. Perhaps it's modest. Perhaps it's something that is not in front of our eyes in the way that the horrors of the war in Ukraine or the horrors in Gaza are in front of our eyes. But there are dozens, if not hundreds, of international potential flashpoints that could be avoided, that could be prevented if there is a preventive action diplomacy of the UN. So more preventive diplomacy as a way to the future for the UN, I would advocate for that. I would not go for things like the Security Council reform, because this is simply not going to happen. I mean, everybody at this table understands that the structure of the Security Council is not reflecting today's realities. There are 5 permanent members of the Security Council. There's only 3 permanent members of the Security Council for which probably nobody at this table would argue that they should remain in a privileged position. 2 of them are there as a result of the 1945 division of power and the fact that the founding fathers of 1945 of the UN San Francisco Conference were actually structuring the organization in a very clever way, making sure that the key stakeholders preserve their control, domination, and authority. The future of the permanent members of the Security Council, I mean, we could moralize, we could give wishes, and I heard speeches in the UN, some of which were very eloquent this year, calling for the abandoning of veto. I wholeheartedly subscribe to this point of view as a professor of Sciences Po, professor of international relations at Sciences Po University in Paris. As someone who is discussing with you guys here the future of the United Nations, I am saying there is a snowball's chance in hell that it happens. So, in conclusion, I'm going to say that as part of my teaching in Paris and also visiting here in Colombia from time to time, we organized a couple of weeks ago a very interesting simulation with students at Columbia University, and it was the Taiwan crisis, imaginary Taiwan crisis, and we divided up students in groups representing US, Taiwan, China, Russia, and the UN. And you know, part of the instructions to the students representing US, China, and Russia were ignore the UN. If they approach you, tell them off. Tell them they have nothing to do with this, because this is the reality. By the way, in the simulation at Columbia University, the UN group figured out the way to get back at the table. And in the end of the day, the Security Council resolution was adopted and the deal was reached with the stamp of the UN, which I believe is today, under the current circumstances, the best way forward for the UN, to hope that once the big powers agree on a certain solution, we preserve the United Nations as the only place where their decision can become part of international law by being adopted in the Security Council. Thank you.
Thank you, too. My next speaker is Miroslav Lajčák. He was the president of the 72nd session of the United Nations General Assembly. Of course, he was also serving in many other foreign diplomatic missions, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Slovak Republic, former EU Special Envoy, a representative for the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, and he was also responsible for the Western Balkans at the EU level. Miroslav, what would you do to strengthen UN?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Of course, each of us on this side of the table, the panelists, are strong UN enthusiasts. We got to know the UN extremely well, and we understand the potential, and our heart is bleeding to see how underused this potential is. But I am absolutely convinced that if the United Nations was abolished today, it will have to be reestablished tomorrow. I mean, the pictures from this week are a good, clear proof. We have the majority of the world leaders present here in New York, in and around the United Nations, delivering speeches, meeting, negotiating, networking. So the first proof is that the United Nations famous convening power is comparable to none. There is no other platform with this power. But of course, to say that the whole purpose of the UN High-Level Week is to bring the leaders for having side meetings would certainly not be enough and satisfactory. So is the criticism of the United Nations justified? My answer is both yes and no. Yes, because unfortunately, United Nations is not the platform or the principal platform where the most urgent issues the humankind is facing related to peace and security, development and human rights are being discussed as it was meant to be. And no, because this is not the mistake of the United Nations. United Nations is as strong as the member states want it to be and allow it to be. And I think the current President of the General Assembly described it very eloquently in her opening speech. I really liked it very much when she said, don't blame the UN Charter when you have made the deliberate decision to violate it. Unfortunately, and that's the reality of our world, member states, and particularly the most powerful ones, usually choose different platforms, and as a rule, platforms which do not have the legitimacy and the universality of the United Nations to discuss the most important and most sensitive issues. And this is also why most of these alternative platforms fail to deliver results, because they are not representative. And if I'm to put it bluntly, usually these platforms are all kinds of coalitions of the willing, which have one thing in common, that you only bring those who think like you. And the others whose views are inconvenient to you are left out, even though they might be very relevant or even necessary for finding a solution of the problem. United Nations is the most universal and the most representative international organization with a broad mandate to address any problems and challenges. So it is our mistake and our failure not to use this potential. Of course, there is a huge room for improvement on the UN side as well, and many of these elements were already mentioned. Let me briefly mention the representativeness of the Security Council, very painful. The agenda, the member states insist on keeping on the agenda issues of the 60s and 70s, and out of national pride would not allow to move on and to address the issues of today and tomorrow in particular. The next problem that I see is the lack of legitimate participation of all relevant segments of our societies, because UN is intergovernmental organizations. Sometimes it looks like it wants to lock ourselves in this intergovernmental format, ignoring the fact that there are other very legitimate partners such as businesses, academia, civil society, religion, labor unions, who need to be part of our decision-making process. And what I personally consider the most important, and here comes my experience as both a diplomat and a politician, is the understanding that our end product is not a resolution or a declaration, that our end product is the impact on the life of people, which is not so obvious to diplomats. But if we cannot explain to a common, sorry for the expression, man or woman on the street, why UN matters and why it is important for them, then of course UN is not fulfilling its role. So this is something that every diplomat must be fully aware of every time we start our discussions and negotiations. And my final point is that, yes, all of us pledge to support multilateralism. If you follow the speeches of the leaders, one after another, they all pay very strong verbal lip service to multilateralism, but we do not act accordingly. So we speak about multilateralism, but we do not act as multilateralists. On the contrary, there is currently less respect for the rules, less responsibility for the common good than before. As we all know, politics has become transactional and cynical. We have growing number of conflicts. We have growing number of violations of UN Charter, violations of international law. We have human rights abuses, humanitarian crises. We have deepening social, economic, humanitarian, environmental distress. So if we are serious about multilateralism and the United Nations, which I believe we are, we need to sit down and have a serious discussion about the UN future. And this discussion doesn't have to be initiated or started by the UN itself. It can be also initiated by think tanks, by the group of people like around this table who have the wisdom and experience just to put it on the agenda and make sure that it will become also an item on the agenda of governments. And of course, in this discussion, first and foremost, we need to acknowledge there is a clear need for reform, for cuts, for modernization, to avoid duplications, and to refocus on the core business. And second, to find the answer to the question, what does really matter? Where is the added value of the United Nations in today's world? And our predecessors 8 years ago were able to do it. So are we able to do it nowadays? That's the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miroslav. Thank you. My next speaker, Volkan Bozkır. He was the 75th President of the United Nations General Assembly. He was also Minister of European Union Affairs of Turkey, 2014 Turkey, 2014, 2015, 2015, 2016, member of the Turkish Parliament. Volkan, you are very wise insider too. You saw what's going on. How can we strengthen our United Nations organization?
Thank you so much. I would prefer to comment according to Chatham rules and being frank in this group. We can always talk philosophically on how we can mend the United Nations, what we can do, but I think the time is that United Nations is in danger, and the key word is success. In anything, if it is a sports club, if it is a business, if it is politics, if it's bureaucracy, people must be successful. If not, then the blame game starts. And if you look at the United Nations, many parts of the United Nations are very successful. They are doing a great job, 200,000 personnel around the world. The institutions named starting with UN, all of them are good. They have been very helpful to the world and to the people. However, the problem is in politics. In politics, for perhaps decades, there has been no success story for the United Nations. So we must dwell upon what is the reason for it and how we can get out of this dilemma. I would like to share with you some of my experiences as the President of the General Assembly, not in political matters, but how the system is not functioning well because of the things you are not seeing. We only saw it as presidents of the General Assembly. For example, people call me, you're an unlucky PGA, because I was PGA during COVID. And I say that I was unlucky to be a president at that time, but I was lucky that I brought the General Assembly from closed to a functioning General Assembly, which I think is more important than just blaming the COVID for stopping the operations in the United Nations. United Nations wasn't ready for extraordinary situations. It could have been COVID, or it could have been a terror attack, or it could have been an electricity blackout. But in those kind of situations, the General Assembly didn't have the tools to vote or meet. So the electronic voting system came after the COVID. And because of that, if there is a difficult situation, the United Nations General Assembly can vote electronically. During COVID time, we were depending on the health section of the United Nations. And the doctor was never available. He was living in New York, but in New York State, somewhere near the Niagara Falls. And when we were seeking advice to have meetings, how should we do it? How many people should sit in the delegation table? Will it be one person or two person? masks, etc., we were not being helped by the health section. The interpreters were given the right to interpret from home. So one interpreter who was interpreting from Switzerland went to court, and the court said that you are working during the late night hours, so you have the right not to interpret. So I said, there are 20 million people jobless, so kick these interpreters out so that we have interpreters who will do the job. And then we gave the instruction that all interpreters must interpret from New York. Even that was the number one person in the United Nations is the PGA. But when you sit at the rostrum with the Secretary General, the Chief of Protocol comes and helps the Secretary General with the chair, as if he's the number one. But I was standing up so that she or he helped me also. But I mean, the Secretary General, in reality, is the person who leads the system, and the PGAs are there to in a kind of a symbolic nature. The PGA doesn't have a salary. PGA doesn't have a residence. PGA doesn't have a health insurance. I mean, my country supported me so well that I was even in a better situation than the Secretary General. But there are countries which financially cannot afford this operation that well. So this must be also considered. The other thing was, of course, when the PGA talks from the podium, there are teleprompters which didn't work when the United States President was talking, and you pay $1,500 for each session. I said, why is this? They said, the system needs money. So I was paying $1,500 for the teleprompters. So one day, the Secretary General liked also to talk from the podium, and I said, you give me $800. He said, why? Because I pay $1,500, so you pay me half of it. He said, this is ridiculous. He didn't know that I was paying $1,500 for the teleprompter. If you go to, if you fly, you will see that the UN personnel are flying first class or whatever class it is, while many of the high-level people are trying to find a space. They normally travel in the economic class. So when I was president, the system was closed. I came here 17th of August. Practically nobody was there. I went to the D2 building, and there was a guy, security guy, who said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to my office. He said, but you don't have the card. I said, I have the card, but it's not activated. I said, how do I activate it? You go to the headquarters and activate it and come back. There was nobody in their headquarters. And among the 200,000 people, 50 of the PGA office was in the office, and the Secretary General came also with the 100 people. So we are altogether 150 people dealing with COVID. So what I'm telling these are things actually which makes the United Nations not work efficiently. And we need brave people in the United Nations system. As former Secretary General died in the plane accident trying to solve a problem. But the Secretary General and the PGA are the two parts of an apple, and they must support each other. And if one of them is not brave enough and the other is too much brave, then the system doesn't function. So they say that the PGA must be impartial. I said, what is this impartiality? They said, you must be very careful. I said, look, then I can't do anything. If I turn right, it is wrong. If I turn left, it's wrong. So I said, I make a new definition to impartiality. It is fairness. So I followed that. So the best documents are created by the best people in the United Nations. But nobody understands these documents because they are so sophisticated. People on the street doesn't understand it. So it is a game among the people who are in the United Nations system. And they feel satisfied with documents, but nobody understands it. SDGs, for example, ask ordinary people, name 4 SDGs, they will say all of them are good. Which one among all of them is good? They will say all of them. They will not be able to count the very important SDG names because it is among the people who are in the United Nations system. The people of the world doesn't understand it. So what I would have done as Secretary General was the question asked to my colleagues. The Secretary General must be brave, and brave enough to do it, not because it is written, but to do it because it has the power. I think the political wind is the important thing, which will make the General Assembly powerful and the Secretary General powerful. So there's no instruction that the Secretary General should go to Russia or Ukraine or to Gaza or whatever problematic area is. But if a Secretary General goes to those places timely, then the political wind will make him or her powerful, and the General Assembly will also follow suit. So I think these are the views I wanted to share with you. And of course, as I agree with Miroslav that we don't have the luxury to replace the United Nations. United Nations should be with us. It's the only platform where we can, all countries have a place and a voice, and we must benefit from this, using it properly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Volkan. Thank you. Thank you. Actually, here next to me is sitting a very special lady, Madam President Halonen, speaking about collected wisdom in years spent in international diplomacy and overlooking also United Nations. Probably she is the one with the deepest and the longest experience. So the floor is yours, Madam President.
Thank you. So I have followed the discussion with great respect and also interest. But I think that now the latest speakers have perhaps come back to what I fully agree, quite much agree. The question is that can we reform UN with the structure of UN, or is the basic reason among the member states? So when somebody's here asking that who has the gray hair, so we ladies have not always the gray hair when we are quite old. So I think that Amre Moussa and Ismail might be older than me, but I have been working with Kofi Annan, with Ban Ki-moon, and now with Guterres. And I have also been five years a foreign minister of my predecessor, Martti Ahtisaari, who solved the Namibia issue. But I would say very simply, those good results, what we have done in the past, would not be possible today. Even we have the same UN and we have the same structure. But we have to see that how we change perhaps UN, but also the world. When, for instance, President Trump or the Prime Minister Netanyahu or many others, they have did worse in their speeches, but I think that many others are thinking to follow in the same way. So if the member states don't respect the United Nations, so not in any kind of the architectural difference can make the situation better. But it's very interesting what Maria Fernandez, for instance, said concerning the role of the Secretary General and also the General Assembly, because, of course, one of the big problems have been the Security Council, and the present president of Finland, Alexander Stubb, we are not from the same political parties, but he's a conservative, but proposed that enlargement of the Security Council by Latin America, Africa, and Asia could, with a new permanent members, not veto, but permanent member position, could perhaps change a little bit the situation. Because if the Security Council cannot work, of course the power will move somewhere else. And Maria Fernandez's idea that it could be more the General Assembly, why not? I have the feeling that it might be outside of the UN, because these power-thinking member states, they come back to the old stories that they can do it by themselves, even with the others and suffering. But then I think that let's come back later on in different discussions we will have, that what we could do in the different levels. I personally, I trust quite much in the regional system, and I have seen when most of you have become members of the European Union, or before that, the Council of Europe, and I think that it has been positive, the interest and also the cooperation, how it has worked. Now I have had a possibility to follow African situation with UNCCD, where I have been 10 years, and I think that the people in the Deep South, they are more optimistic than what we are in the North. And so in that way, all the best for the discussion, but don't think that we can find one silver bullet and then solve the issue. I think so that we have to do it in very broad basis and perhaps also try to do this dialogue between the different regions, if not the member countries. But thank you for the discussion so far.
Thank you, Madam President. My next speaker is Patricia Scotland. Patricia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. And can I say that I've been absolutely electrified by the presidents and the views that they have. And I hope you will forgive me if I say that I am not as pessimistic as many. And I should qualify that because I have been told since I was very young that I am in fact crazy. And I'm crazy because apparently I always see that which is possible as opposed to that which other people think can be done. So let me tell you why I am not as pessimistic about the opportunities to reform the Secretariat and the role of the Secretary General in terms of the UN. The first is, of course, we know that politics affects every element of the United Nations. It determines the posts that are there, and there are real conflicts when anyone tries to remove. And I also have to say, I had the privilege of being the Secretary General of the Commonwealth of Nations, that's 56 countries, 5 regions, at a time of real difficulty. And it's true that your member states will tell you that they want reform, but most, in fact, do not, because to reform means a transfer of power, and most people do not want to transfer power. So I want to say to you that you should never let a good crisis go to waste. When I became Secretary General, it was said that the Commonwealth was in a parlous state. And since this is Chatham House, I will tell you that when I came in, we had 3 months' money in the bank. So if I was not an international organization, I would have been trading whilst insolvent. It was necessary to do radical reform. And because we had no money, radical reform was not only necessary, but it was possible because we had no choice. As a result, I had to remove 3 deputy secretary generals in order to save the money and allow the organization to work. I had to synthesize and reprioritize a number of the different structures so that it was more streamlined and more efficient. When I came in, we were considered to be amongst the 3 worst performing international organizations which some of the funders were paying, and we were C-rated. Within 18 months, we went from C-rated to AA+. We reformed, we strategically made great partnerships with others, and change was delivered. Of the 56 countries, we had 26 countries who were at one stage or another in difficulty. And we were able, by going on the ground, to help all of those countries. So it appears now to be the worst of times. But what I can say to you is it can be the best of times if we work together and we look at the data and we plan holistically and change. So I feel great empathy for those who fear now, but absolute determination that it is within our hands. It is not sufficient for us to say, this cannot be done. I am a snowball's chance in hell, according to other people. I'm one of 12 children, born in a small island developing states. I'm my parents' 10th only child. I was never supposed to do a degree at 20, become a barrister at 21, the youngest silk at 35, to become a minister, foreign minister, deputy Lord Chancellor, deputy Home Secretary, and then the first woman to be Attorney General. It's possible, but it's not possible unless we work together. And everything I was able to achieve as a Secretary General was in partnership with all the UN agencies, with the ASEAN, with the PIF, with the CARICOM, with the AU. So partnership and multilateralism is in itself the solution. And I'll leave you with the last thing that we did, because we really wanted to know about good governance. So the 56 countries got together, and over a period of 2 years, we asked, was it possible to create the generally accepted performance management principles of good governance? And we discovered the following. 80% of delivering good governance is about having the right system. 20% is having the right people. So even if you have brilliant people and you have a bad system, it is very, very difficult to deliver. And the UN at the moment has a bad system, even though it has brilliant people. But once you've got a good system, 20% is the people. And of that 20%, the leader is determinative of 80% of the performance. So if you have a good system and a good leader, you are bound to succeed. This is not beyond us. We simply have to choose, and I hope we do.
Thank you, Patricia. It's a great message. To all of us, I have 3 more speakers, and then I will close the session. Csaba, Nasir, and then Ismail will have closing remarks. I'm giving the floor now to Csaba Korosi. He was the president of the 77th session of the UN General Assembly. Csaba.
Thank you very much, Rosen. And first, I would like to make some remarks, reflections on what my excellent colleagues have said. To a very large extent, I agree with many of their notions, and then I try to roll out some kind of notions, some kind of ideas, or where and how to reform. I agree with the sentences and with the ideas that the UN functioning needs a very serious rethinking. It needs a rethinking politically, in terms of organization, in terms of mandating, and in terms of financing, to be relevant for the 21st century. Here comes the first point of what we sometimes touch upon, sometimes we pretend that we don't see. there is a debate whether or not the United Nations should go back, so to say, to the course and deal with peace and security, war and peace only. My dear colleagues and friends, United Nations has never been designed to deal with peace and security only. From the very outset, including the charter, if you read, it's much, much broader. So if we would, for any reason, think that we should slash about 2/3 of the activities of the United Nations, the next day we would understand that we are missing something very serious that would hamper peace and security. The third notion, some colleagues have mentioned the role of the member states. I fully agree. The UN can be as useful for the global relations and global processes as the member states would allow the UN to be. In many cases, now let me put the mismanagement that is obvious in some cases into brackets. The most obvious problems that are visible for the people in the world are because member states don't want the United Nations to act on something or to finish something. We definitely need a global organization that is providing governance, not government, governance on shared global common goods. And that can also work on setting norms and provide platform of cooperation. Now, some concretely, in concrete terms, what I say must be addressed way beyond the fiscal reorganization of the organizations. Let me start with the General Assembly, so to say from the home ground. We are in crisis time, and we try to take a number of decisions on small and big issues. Many of them are related to crisis management. But we still very often fail put our decisions on the basis of scientific evidence. So most of our decisions are some kind of ideological compromise, even on issues where there is no compromise on ideology. We don't have the procedures and don't have the institutional backing to make sure that the GA decisions are supported by scientific evidence. Prioritization of the work. I think, like all my colleagues, when I came to take office, there were already 181 items on the agenda ahead of the year. It means, during your tenure, of course, it went up, so all of us dealt with more than 200 agenda items. It means, particularly in crisis time, an organization that has 200 priorities, never mind what crisis is around you, it means this organization doesn't know where to go. So we must create a system of strategic prioritization that is in accordance with the challenges of the time and the challenges that are coming ahead. That is my next point. 80% of the decisions of the General Assembly, and I would say the whole UN system, are about the past. Even if the document is mentioning the future, in this way or the other, we try to fix the past. And we are very happy that if we can have a text on what, how we perceive what is just and what should be thought about the affairs. But now, particularly in crisis time, and particularly when disrupting technologies are completely changing the environment of operations, don't you think we should spend much more time and energy dealing with the future, regulating what we can of the actions necessary to address the challenges of the future? On the Security Council, and I hear what my good friend Vuk has said, and unfortunately it is the common wisdom and the accumulated knowledge of the past 20 years of the negotiations to reform the Security Council that it cannot be reformed. Here, I would tend to agree with the Secretary General that it is impossible until someone does it. Because we all know all the 5 chapters of the bunch of issues that need reform, that need reconsideration. And the obstacles are also very well known. And it's not only P5 against the 180 plus countries, but the large grouping, negotiating grouping in the General Assembly that mutually neutralize themselves. Therefore, the 193 countries never produced a suggestion to the P5 or to the Security Council that this is the reasonable compromise. This is the way ahead, at least for the first stage. So it's time, I think, to calm down a little bit, think what is possible, what might be the reasonable compromise. Not everybody will be happy, but the process is not an impossible process. Yet, I acknowledge, someone mentioned that the most burning issue is the veto right of the P5 in the Security Council, which basically blocks international decisions, processes, in the cases of some very, very sensitive crisis issues. And in order to change that, the Charter should be changed, and the Charter can be only changed if the P5 endorses it. So you can guess how easy that would be. And I also agree that there is a way in the Charter to amend the Charter itself. It's to convene the General Conference. And I guess we could even convene and we could even reach a result in the General Conference, but still you have the difficulty of the ratification. And I do not expect the US Senate to ratify a Charter amendment which would cut back the rights of the US, and I could extend it to other 4 countries as well. But peace and security is not always and not only hampered by blocking the processes and votes of the Security Council. Let's be quite honest. The big issues of peace and security, disarmament particularly, very often were decided upon not in the United Nations. The big decisions, be it the Camp David Accord for the Middle East, be it the nuclear disarmament issues, were always done outside of the United Nations. And the result came back to the UN, and the UN dealt with it and made it global. The problem now is that we don't have those platforms. They either are dead or just dormant. So if we cannot reform the decision-making in the United Nations, at least we have to pay attention, where are those platforms that are very much needed?
Thank you. Please, if you can finalize. Thank you. If you can finalize, thank you.
Sure. Just 1 or 2 things to be kept in mind. Why the UN reform is necessary but will not be easy. The money, mandates, and majorities are in the UN are not converging right now. It also means that we don't have a reform coalition. of member states in the United Nations. And liquidity was mentioned as also threatening the immediate functioning of the UN. I think 2026 is very difficult, but 2027 might be even more difficult in that case. So my expectation is that the UN 80, which is on the table, that is not a deep-going reform, it is much more a fiscal survival. It will be embraced in a way, it will be partly implemented, and it will come back when the next Secretary General, hopefully, as I think it was Volkan mentioned, will be brave enough to look into the depth into the matter, and we restart the serious processes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Now, my next speaker is His Excellency Nasir Abdulaziz Al Nasir. He was serving as the President of the UNGA, also permanent representative of Qatar to the United Nations. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you. In the last 2-3 days, I listened carefully to so many speakers, either in the General Assembly or in this distinguished meeting. I will go straight to the points. Many of my colleagues explain and suggest the problem today. It's not only the reform. There is another problem that the UN system is facing, financially and administration. I brought with me 26 years of experience. I worked here as a diplomat, then an ambassador, then President of the General Assembly, and UN High Representative for Alliance of Civilization. No doubt that the world needs United Nations. Without the UN, I don't know how this world will look like. Many people blame the UN. It's not doing the right job, but that's not correct. The UN organization came from 193 countries. When there is a consensus and compromise, I think the UN can do a good job. So financially, I think the budget of the UN shouldn't be like this. Few countries paying 60% of the budget, the rest of the world shared. So when there is a problem with one of the major contributor to the financial, to the budget of the UN, then the UN cannot work. Like today, the UN facing financial problem, you see. I think the budget should be distributed fairly between all member of states, so no one can try to blackmail the UN and stop the work. I will tell you some of my experience. You know, when I been elected as a President of the General Assembly, of course, my salary is $1, and $250,000 is the budget. How can you work with this small amount? So luckily, my country gave me the budget. And even with that budget, after 10 months, I ran out of money. How can other presidents of the General Assembly do their work when they don't have the financial support? Then many countries will contribute, but also they have their hidden agenda. You know, one day, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General, called me. I was High Representative. He said, I need your help. We want now to look at the President of General Assembly's budget. We don't want to face problem. I said, easy. He said, can you meet with some legal people and please give them some ideas, suggestions? I said, but do you have enough power to enforce Fifth Committee to do that? He said, no, but let's see. So I sat with them. I told them, don't waste your time and my time. That's not fair for the President of the General Assembly, who is the head of the World Parliament and big mandate, and there is no money. He will ask countries, he will ask organizations to support. That's how can he work? First, 1 year for the President of the General Assembly is not enough. A group of countries try to push at least 2 years mandate, but been rejected by some of the P5. So this is one. Then the competition between the Secretary General Office and the President Office, General Assembly. As one of my colleagues, Volkan, before I saw that, I witnessed, because, 26 years, it's a long time. So I called on Mr. Ban Ki-moon, I said, and he was my friend. I've known him for a long time before even he became Foreign Minister and then the Secretary General. I said, look, I was watching how the work is going on for all these years. It's not fair. It's not good for the UN system to have this competition. And sometimes it's a silly thing, pushing the Secretary General in front of the BGA or not allowing, or the protocol. I said, I want this year to show the world that you and I, we can work closely, not as a friend, as responsible for this international organization. And please, tell your staff not try to show you how much they try to protect the interests of Secretary General on the other side. He said, tell me there's some. I said, no. You bring the Chief of Protocol and other key people in your office and tell them to cooperate. Then you and I, we will succeed. So this is one. Second, I been elected as a high representative of for the UN, for the Alliance of Civilization. Zero budget. And this is soft power tool organization need to prevent conflicts through dialogue, through mediation, through other. Then I have to go around the world and beg for the money. And luckily, I have connection. I managed to collect every year good amount of money that can push the alliance to work and do its work.
Your Excellency, if you can finalize, thank you.
Yeah, I'll come back to it. Just give me a few minutes. Then I found out that if I receive $1 million support, 18% goes to the UN, 3% for the Secretary General Office, 15% for UNOPS, because UNOPS are managing the financial end. So this is one side. During the 80s and 90s, UN was working, even though through the Soviet Union and the United States, but Security Council doing a good job, General Assembly, and the 90s, and I was also member, Qatar, my country, in Security Council, 2006 and 7. The Security Council was working smoothly. Today, yes, we are facing a big challenge. You know why? There is two things missing: consensus, dialogue, and compromise. Thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you. And last remarks now, really very short, 2-3 minutes, as most of the people are running out of time, to our co-chair, Mr. Ismail Serageldin. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosen. I have sort of 3 points I'd like to make about things that can be done without reforming the Security Council, but that I think are relevant anyway. The first of these is, well, to explain that a little bit better, I tell you a very brief story. I was with Boutros Ghali in his office at the time when he was trying to secure the airport in Mogadishu in Somalia. And 170 Pakistani soldiers had been seconded to the UN. And the problem was how to get them from Pakistan to Mogadishu. So he called the Secretary of Defense of the United States, who said to him, well, I have no particular orders to do this. So he called the President of the United States, who said, okay, I will give an order. Then an hour and a half later, he called again the Secretary of Defense, and he said, yes, now I can do it, but I will charge it to my budget, such and such a budget. Now, the point that was made, he says, look what I have to do just to get an aircraft to carry these guys from here. Not even volunteering soldiers, just to move them around with one plane. And he said, and the problem is that I cannot second or delegate this to somebody because the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States will not take calls from underlings. It has to be the Secretary General himself who can get in to do that. So he had made two proposals to the UN Security Council in a paper called Agenda for Peace, which, however, was not accepted at the time, but that deserve our attention again. The first of these is that when the Security Council makes a decision that the United Nations should deploy something there, they give an instruction then to the Secretary General to find ways of implementing it. And he has to go into all these endless negotiations. And he pointed out in his paper to the Security Council, the P5 should have a small unit of their armed forces ready to be deployed. And as he pointed out, I, as Secretary General, do not make the decision. You are the ones who make the decisions. And if one of you is vetoing it, then it's not the decision. So when you have a decision, you already have an agreement that you're asking me to implement. In order to implement it promptly and quickly, you have enormous resources. These are small units of people we're talking about. The second part of his the request was to have the capacity that they should make a decision on preventative deployment, meaning that before people get into extremely bad situations, if you deploy some UN personnel between the warring parties, you can avoid a lot of things. And there were two cases that he cited, one of which was in Yugoslavia, one of which is elsewhere, where a small number, a contingent of about 400 soldiers put between two factions and so on. Considering what we just said earlier on about how many wars are going on, how many conflicts are going on around the world, that is a small thing to do to tamp down these conflicts and allow both humanitarian and development assistance to go on. The last point to make is the importance of these, this idea of UN presence and activism and redeployment of very limited resources will be employed. Remember that the war of '67 between Israel and Egypt and the Arab world occurred when UNITA withdrew the UN troops in Tehran. I mean, as long as the UN troops were in Tehran, Tehran was open and it was following the previous decisions. Afterwards, it escalated rapidly. It led to the blockage and it led to the war of '67 and many things that we know as repercussions of that. So we should not underestimate what the mere presence of the UN in the field can do, both on humanitarian ground, on development issues, but also on security issues without necessarily changing anything in the existing rules, but reviving this idea that the UN has a role and that it can play it and that member states can help it play, and that in the end, small steps should be done even if the big transformations cannot be done immediately. At least we can do these kinds of things in a very short term, and they would have benefit because if you reduce the conflicts, then you allow humanitarian aid, you allow development to take place. Thank you.
Thank you. Great message. I'm closing the session. I have a simple message to the members of the board of NGIC. Please stay because we are starting now organizational meeting, which is going to be run by Zlatko, everybody else, thank you for being with us, and let's have a round of applause to our great panelists.